High def camera on. My girlfriend Katie, she thinks there's something in the house. I don't know.
You believe me, right?
I think we're gonna have a very interesting time capturing whatever paranormal phenomena is occurring or is not occurring. Windows are locked, doors are locked, the alarm is on. Hearing a weird sound.
Something's here. I feel it breathing on me.
There's footsteps in, but there's no footsteps out.
Oh, God. Oh, my God.
If you do try to play games with it, that's inviting it in.
Jeez, this looks like something bit you.
It's not the house. It's me.
You cannot run from this. It will follow you.
I'm in control.
You're not in control.
What's happening to me?
This thing left a message.
If it's not a ghost, what is it?
It's been 15 years since the found footage sensation Paranormal Activity was unleashed on an unsuspecting public, and I've got an awesome panel to come in and celebrate this anniversary with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Amy Pearson.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Brett Nevue.
Hey, everybody.
Anna Mariah.
Hello.
Frank Merle.
Happy to be here.
And Chelsea David.
Great to be back. Hi.
And we are here chatting about Paranormal Activity, which had its festival and such release in 2007, but had its wide release in 2009. So that's what we're celebrating. And I'm super happy to have everybody here. Thank you all for coming on the show, and a welcome. So I'd love to hear where folks first had their encounter with Paranormal Activity. Let's kick things off over in the right-hand corner with Brett. Where were you? Who were you doing it with?
I saw it in the theater. I think this is back when my wife would go to these kind of movies with me, because, in 2009, that's when people went to movies with each other. And I think she didn't go to Blair Witch. And so I made her go to this one. And I don't think she liked it very much, in that I think she was scared by it. I mean, I'm a big found footage film fan. And I really loved the way that it felt and everything, and its content. It was so different too. And so yeah, in the theater, in the dark, with a bunch of people, it was a blast.
Anna, how about you?
I'm late to Paranormal Activity. I didn't see it in the theaters. I think I saw it years after the fact. So there were already like sequels that were out by that point. So super late to the game, but I'm sad that I didn't get to see it in the theater, because I think the benefit of viewing it on a big screen is you catch so many little details that are in there. Yeah, I loved it right out of the gate, because it wasn't so big, like, okay, we're trying to outdo special effects or whatever. They really tried to create a genuine sense of realism with what they were doing. And I thought that was so much more effective than, okay, we're going to have like a ton of stuff flying around, or a lot of pots and pans banging, which you kind of see as the series progresses. But I really appreciated that they were trying to keep it small and realistic, which was so much more effective.
Do you remember, had you seen some other found footage films?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Before you came around to seeing the original?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I had seen anything from, like the, I guess, original, Cannibal Holocaust or whatever, sure. And stuff like that. So I was already familiar with the subgenre, as it were.
Because depending on when you came to it, I'm guessing there was already kind of the imitators.
Yeah. And... Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I'd seen like Blair Witch or whatever. But yeah, I just thought it was so well done,
sure.
for what it was doing.
Frank.
Yes, I think Blair Witch is going to come up a lot in this conversation. Because the comparisons start with the advertising, right? Like the marketing leading up to the release. I think both of those films did the thing where they put the camera on an audience, right? Test screeners, and the test screeners are losing their minds, right? And that's how they promoted the movie. And so I was there opening night for Paranormal Activity. It was either a Thursday at midnight, back then, movies would still open at midnight, or I was there Friday, but it was a packed theater of horror fans, and that's the best way to see this kind of movie. I remember people screaming and laughing, and then the weird quietness during the quiet parts. Right. Yeah. So, people would stop munching their popcorn. Right. I was also there like an opening night screening of Blair Witch, and that was a similar vibe in the theater of a packed house. And so, the only other time I've experienced that level of just fandom enjoying themselves on an opening night movie was Terrifier 2 more recently. And so that for me,
it's the same movie, really.
Yeah. But in terms of indie horror in a packed theater of horror fans really enjoying the hell out of themselves, for me it's Blair Witch, Paranormal Activity, Terrifier 2, and about 10 years apart each of those. So I have a theory that every 10 years we're due for one of these.
That would be great if we could set our watches by that. Chelsea.
Yes, I was super late in watching this as well. This came out when I was a freshman in college, and I always watched horror films with my grandmother, my late grandmother. So by that time, she had passed, and none of my friends were like big into horror films like me. So I waited and watched it on the small screen at home. Sort of waited for Blair Witch as well, because the marketing really convinced the audience that this was real. There were rumors like, is this real? Is this not real? And I was very much gullible and scared, like, well, what if it is real? And I'm, so I suspended my disbelief so much that, I really wanted to wait. I finally watched it probably in my early to mid 20s and just absolutely fell in love with it. I loved the level of terrified I was. With me, I have really bad eyesight. If none of you know, AC does. And, I would lean in really close trying to get those really nuances, which absolutely backfired on me. It would be like jump scare all over the place. So I just love the level of terrified that I got with this genre across the board. Rewatching it again this week in preparation for this, I was, pleasantly surprised that I still had those moments that I forgotten about before and had pleasant little jump scares there as well.
Awesome. And Amy, thank you. This is your debut on Horror 101. So thank you for joining us from across the waters over in England. Amy and I know each other from the IMDb message boards way back in the day. So what was your experience of Paranormal Activity?
Yeah, so I was quite similar to Anna and Chelsea in that I didn't see it until a little while after it had come out. And I think I was a bit snobby at the time about the idea of found footage. So I hadn't really seen very much of it. And I thought, maybe it's a little bit questionable. I hadn't seen Blair Witch and actually didn't until during lockdown, and then was devastated because it very quickly established itself as my absolute favorite horror of much all time. So yeah, I thought Paranormal Activity was excellent. In prep for the panel, I meant to rewatch it this week and didn't get time. And I was telling my partner, who has never seen it, about how great it is. He was like, "Oh, I just didn't want to watch any more found footage." And I was like, "But it's so good. It's a good found footage film. It's surprisingly excellent." Yeah, I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it, and by how terrifying it is. That sense of realism that it creates, and the relationships between the people in the film, I think, just really set it up for doing an excellent job.
Thank you all so much. That was awesome. I remember seeing it similar to you, Frank. I think we got a sneak preview here in Chicago, and so I remember going to the midnight. It was like a late night screening. I don't think it was midnight, but it was a late night screening on like a Wednesday night, and similar to you, none of us knew what this movie was. This was before they were having the big ad campaign of demand the film in your community. So we were all just in there going, "Oh, cool. New horror film. Let's go check it out." Found footage wasn't really a thing at the time in 2009. We were all just kind of like, what's happening? And there's so much of just staring at nothing happening where you're just scanning the frame. Like, is there something they pick up on? When I went home from that screening, I got into my house and I was like, I'm genuinely unnerved. Like, and I have not had that experience in quite a while, and I haven't had it since, but I absolutely remember going home from Paranormal Activity and just being like, I do not feel good about this. And I was going to be leaving town, and I told my wife, I'm like, do not watch this movie. Do not watch this movie while I am gone and you're alone in the house. It's not going to go
Toby
well.
might attach to you and stay in the house.
But it is one of those movies that I think really delivers in the same way that Blair Witch does. You invest in it, and even if you don't, and we'll talk about this in a second, even if you don't necessarily love the characters, it's easy to invest in the situation. And I think that's why this one and Blair Witch work as well as they do. Anybody want to give us the brief synopsis of, what the setup for Paranormal Activity is?
There's a house.
Good.
And there's what it's perceived as poltergeist activity in the house. And it's all in camera. It's all from... And I love that camera so much. Oh my gosh, I don't know about y'all, but I love that giant ass camera so much.
Yeah.
And you see it right away in the mirror, and it's testing it out. And we see the box that came in. And anyway, a guy and his girlfriend, or a woman and her boyfriend,
Mika and Katie.
Mika and Katie are testing out this camera, and then we found out that she's been hearing some things. And then over the course of the story, history with something in her life, some sort of supernatural force in her life, and it is in the house. They've been hearing sounds. That's why they started filming. And then that grows and grows and grows, and different things start to happen. And Katie starts to become more panicked and more ill, and Mika becomes more. I read something that I don't know if Mika is really Mika's name, but that maybe she had said it incorrectly. In the very first shot.
Yeah.
And so,
and they just had to go with it.
They had to go with it. And that's how much videotapes cost back then. And so anyway, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until the Steven Spielberg finale. And there we are.
Thank you, Brett. That was excellent.
I don't want to give away too much.
Yeah. No, well, that's okay.
We will now give away everything.
I will give away everything.
Let me just get this over with. There will be spoilers. Here we go.
My setup. Yes. Thank you.
That was excellent. That was pretty good for a spoiler-free setup.
Yeah.
But yes, let's talk quickly about the characters, because I feel like Mika is set up as the guy who's going to figure it all out. He's going to fix this problem. And watching it 15 years later, I was like going, man, what a tool.
What an absolute ass. I was just screaming at the TV, like, listen to your girlfriend. Do you hate your girlfriend?
Yeah.
My mom
wandered in. It seems like he's got who owns a house like that by themselves and then is like, yeah, move in with me. I have 4 or 5 bedrooms, and we all have to have, those are the guest rooms. Who else coming over here? Anyway, nobody.
I know.
Anna, what were you saying?
My mom wandered in partway through me rewatching this, and she sat down for about 5 minutes, and she's like, this guy's a real jerk, isn't he? I'm like, yeah.
When my partner and I were watching it, I don't know if it's in the lore or whatnot, but he was like, oh, he seems like a day trader. And is this before the housing crisis?
Yeah.
And we were like, oh, he's a day trader before the housing crisis. That's why his house is so nice.
Right.
I was just going to say that was my exact thoughts on it. I remember the second time I watched it being like, how can they afford all of this? And being like, oh yeah, this came out just before the crash.
Yes.
And it's the director's house, right? They filmed in the director's house. So it's like he got his whole family, or he had, I don't know, it seemed like he probably had kids, given the giant stuffed animal. And he just, I'm making a movie. Everybody get out for 2 weeks. And then it's such a 90s / early 2000s house, everything. And I'm like, wow, lots of houses got stuck in time after this moment. so many houses still look like this.
He had a very impressive collection of DVDs, like a whole wall of DVDs in the living room. I was like, okay, this is a filmmaker's house, right? But no, the thing about character and that character not being likable, as everyone on the panel seems to say, for me, it's part of the charm of the movie in terms of the, and somebody has already talked about this, the verisimilitude, that's my fancy word for the realism that they're going for, which is sort of the point of found footage, right? The close, why are we watching a movie that with shaky cameras and VHS quality cinematography? Well, it's to get us more immersed in the realism, right? That's the point. Well, so in movies, when you're a screenwriter, you're creating characters and making them either likable or unlikable. But part of the charm of the screenplay or lack thereof, right? There's very little character development. So we're making our decisions about whether or not we like the guy based on the little snippets that happen to be captured, right? So we're not seeing their whole relationship, right? And so for me, that's another thing I sort of wanted to talk about, is the strangeness of the screenplay, right? Is part of what makes it feel real, because if it was real, well, these are just the scenes that happen to be captured. Like another example I want to talk about, the character of the ghost expert that they bring in, right? And so a normal haunted house movie, you would bring in the priest or whoever, some ghost expert. They would come in and they would have a lot of exposition explaining what's going on. In this movie, they bring in the ghost expert. He's like, "No, fuck it, I'm out of here," right? And it's like, well, that didn't forward the plot very much, did it? Well, in real life, we're never forwarding the plot, right? So in real life, things happen, and oh, that didn't work out. Shoot, So to me, again, that's part of the charm of this movie, is it's very messy, and it's messy on purpose.
I love that they do that twice too. It comes back.
And he comes back.
By the way, also, I
told you the last time.
Yeah. Oh, and this the Deus Ex Machina that never shows up, right? His boss, or his colleague,
the demonologist,
who's definitely going to save the day, but he's out of town.
He's out of the country.
Yeah.
I feel like that actor was sick that day, so they said, "God, you just come back and do this again."
Yeah. I told you last time I wasn't gonna, but he drives down from LA, right, to San Diego twice.
Any
to
chance
tell
to
them
go to San Diego?
It's funny that you mentioned the DVDs in the background, because I was reading, Oren Peli has been posting a lot of like 15th anniversary stuff and whatnot. And he said that scene with the doctor sitting on the couch where they're first talking with him was like the hardest shot in the film, because he had to like blur out all of the DVDs in the background, because he didn't want people focusing on what DVDs they had in their collection. He wanted everybody paying attention to the doctor. And I thought that was so funny that he was like, this was the hardest scene to film. It was the hardest to like clean up in post, like to get it so where nobody is looking at the DVDs in the background. I'm like, I would have thought it would have been like, setting the Ouija board on fire, like on its own.
Yeah.
Like, I had no idea.
You would think that blurring out DVDs would be fairly easy in post-production. There's like a shot of the yellow pages is sitting on the kitchen counter at one point, and it's very clearly blurred out. And again, that to me, it felt like, oh, this is when Paramount got a hold of the movie. They got their lawyers involved and made sure, well, we can't see the Yellow Pages logo. Right. And so even that, the awkwardness of the weird blurring made it feel more real.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk really quick. I mean, kind of the genesis of the film is definitely part of the lore, because it was made very cheaply. It was made as an independent feature. Oren Peli just trying to make a movie. It, spiraled into something quite sensational.
Having made not as successful of a film like that, but I've been a part of, films that are on ultra micro budgets like that, shot in the director's house, and just to see, how humble of a beginning that it had, and to see it now like an entire franchise, I think it is just a testament to that director's like, I don't know, eye and how he really supported his actors, like brought them back. And I just think that's great. Like he relied on Mika's camera work, who apparently was sometimes too good at the camera work. So he would have to be coached to be shoddy, which I think is really great. Yeah, it's just like, what a cool, these statistics are not right, but like 1 in a million type of thing, ultra low budget to this crazy franchise is cool. It's cool to see.
During COVID, I wrote a movie called Restless. It was eventually made by Shudder called Night's End, and it's has a Screen Life section in it. But when I first wrote it, it was all found footage because it was COVID, and I was like, I just want to make this. I'd originally written it as something my my daughter and I could make in the hallway in the apartment, and we even we're doing all this stuff, and then it, as luckily and strangely, it ended up getting produced by Shudder, which changed everything. But I, like Chelsea, I learned a lot about what works and what doesn't, and certainly inspired by Paranormal Activity for sure, which is one of my daughter's absolute favorite movies. I think we watched it when they were like 6 or something.
Bad dad.
Teach him young, gotta train him young.
But the very end, when the two things happen, the attack or the throwing of the body and then the attack on the camera, my daughter immediately started crying, screamed and started crying. And then when she attacks the camera, really screamed and then turned to me and was like, "Why did you run?" Started yelling at me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible, like you said, a horrible dad, a bad dad. But to this day, in her room right over there, in that corner is a Paranormal Activity poster hanging on the wall. So the legacy of that story and the beginnings of all that stuff, certainly the found footage aspect, the cheapness of it is beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. One thing that I would really love to do or have somebody do is like that Nuke's Top 5, Did You Miss It? Sort of scenario, like those YouTube videos through the whole film, so I can see all the things.
Totally, it's like an I Spy book.
I would love that, like an I Spy book, and I feel like that, those choices, those like that instinctual choice that we are searching for those answers, like in every sort of horror film or every sort of ghost story, we're looking for those things in the corner. I think that he was like, oh, you know, that's what interests me when I watch any weird video. That's what interests me, or ghost photography or anything like that. It was so smart to do that sort of first.
Yeah, I agree. And this is not the same as something like Blair Witch or Cannibal Holocaust.
No.
You know, this is very much
Static
about...
camera.
Yeah, exactly. Frank touched on some of the elements, and I like to kind of go around. But what is it about found footage, do you think, that really works, especially in the horror genre, this being kind of the one that kicked the doors open? It showed us a new way of storytelling. Amy, do you mind kicking us off with that?
Not at all. I feel like my answer is going to sound too much like a psychologist's answer as well. But I feel like it's that self-insert. So it's kind of like you are really immersed in the story and you're brought straight into the situation. So it's not like you're kind of watching as that voyeur, but you are actually engaged with what's going on. And I think that for me, it ramps up how scary it is. It makes you feel like it's more real. Like even if what's going on is completely outlandish or something we might not think is possible, you feel like it is once you're in the story because it's been portrayed in a way that makes it feel so much more realistic.
I'm glad that you said the thing about self-insertion. You know, I think audiences, or at least this audience, when I'm watching a film, you know, you want to find things that you can relate to. Real life, you're seeing somebody's real life house, not theirs, but you know, you're trying to find elements that you can relate to and something that's familiar. And the mundanity of most of it paired with sort of these awkward things that are and supernatural things that are going on in my head and in I think lots of audiences' heads. You know, how many steps away are you from experiencing something like this? It's so within reach that I think it adds to the element of relativity, you know, like relationship to that.
It makes you part of the story.
Yeah.
You know, you're not just observing it. You are like Amy said, you're immersed in it then. And the great thing about this one too is it starts in progress, you know, like this stuff has already been going on, and that's why now there's a camera involved. So it's not like you're starting at the start, you're starting somewheres in the middle.
And Frank?
Oh, I just say, 2007, 2009. This is the advent, the early days of us all having a video camera in our pocket at all time, right? And so the impulse to, I mean, I saw it recently. I was at a coffee shop, and there was an incident. There was like two people started fighting, and what did everyone else do? Everyone pulled out the camera and started live streaming this, and it was fascinating to me. It was like how much culture has changed, and so this movie just came out right at that time when, you know, Micah says, "Hey, look, I got this camera and I'm going to film everything." That was right when we all got a camera and decided we're all going to start filming everything.
Yeah, I actually had a question for everybody. This last time through, I started to really pick up on and maybe it's because of it being 2024 and horror movies in the past 15 years, everything. I really started picking up on the trauma in the house. And like, Micah's a dick, but I'm also like, her oppression in that relationship and her own like past trauma. I'm like, why would she stay with this guy in this house? She's just home, you know, she's a student, she does beads. Her sister's kind of concerned about her, but I really started picking up on this force that's pushing her down, because this suburban life feels very like normal, perfect, whatever, you know, it's just a nice house, very safe. And the safety that this location does not offer, incredibly dangerous. And that like, it's not just a demon, but it's a demon that like walks up the stairs and turns on lights and does all these things that like a predator might do, an actual like human predator. I hadn't done this before. Still less worried about myself and how scared I was really concerned about her. And I don't know, again, if that's something that has changed in the way that we view horror films over the past 15 years, or just its second, third viewing of this, fourth viewing of this movie. But I really was focusing on her story. Also, maybe knowing that the ending is the ending. I'm like, that attack on me made me feel like, yeah, I deserve that from watching this unfold and doing nothing.
Yeah.
Kind of in addition to some of the things you were mentioning, all of you, I think the other thing is that there's that sense of by looking through a camera, we used to, you know, you would record or you would photograph something to have evidence of it. It means it's real. So if we are looking through a camera lens, that is really happening. And the other thing is the fragmented storytelling, like you were talking, Frank, the hard cuts and the edits that somebody assembled this together. We invest and we are filling in the connective tissue. And so again, it's another way of getting audience investment where we're like, okay, I have to figure out what just happened and what happened just before the next scene that we cut to, what happened in between those two, you know, how has this been progressing? So I think it's a really clever way of getting an audience to absolutely engage and, as many of you point out, to really buy into the reality of the situation.
Anybody else were a little also grossed out by his insistence on filming them having sex again and again and again and again, like that sort of like pressure.
Different time.
different time too. But it's also like that like with people with their phones, like that's still part of like some dude's reality, and that I felt like that was another sense of sort of sexual trauma or whatever it is that's breaking her down too.
Yes, I'd jump in on that too. The symbolism of we're going to film the sex scene and she has to say no several times, right? And then, but also he says, I'm going to film our paranormal activities. And she says no several times and he keeps doing it. That's why we're all saying we don't like the guy, right? I'd like to think that was still a case in 2007 or 2009, that people would have bristled at the number of times she has to say no and he doesn't listen to her. So she is a victim. And I'd like to talk about, you know, when that ghost expert comes over and says, you could leave the house, but it doesn't matter. The demon is attached to you. And so unlike most haunted house movies where you sort of go, well, you could just leave, right? That, so just as a plot point, that really works, that the demon is attached to her, but also that, yes, now we feel sorry for her. We feel trapped in this scenario. That concept that the demon is attached to her really worked structurally for the movie so that the whole movie can take place in the house, because it doesn't matter if you leave or not. But then that, Brett, to your point about her being somebody who has, she talked about childhood trauma, and that is still with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This film did have a festival run, in 2007. Oren Peli took his little movie out there, and it didn't get into some of the bigger festivals, but it caught the attention of Paramount and DreamWorks. It was either Brett or Frank. Somebody alluded to the Spielberg ending.
Yeah.
But there was an original ending. If anybody wants to talk about that, and whether they think it's more or less successful.
Just to sort of piggyback on what I had just said, because I think this is connected too. Because if I never saw it, but I think she died originally.
She slashes her own throat.
And I think too, I think this goes to the same thing where why the reason that doesn't work so well is because she's a victim, because we feel bad for her, so that the new ending, her fate isn't necessarily any better, but her turning into the demon and turning on us, yes, it's creepy and weird, but I think the original ending would just be such a bummer if you take the movie as some sort of metaphor for dealing with trauma.
You see her take the power back.
Yes.
Albeit possessed, but
yes.
Yeah. There's definitely there's some Carrie White vibes going on where, like the victim now becomes the monster, and we're rooting for her to, although, I mean, I don't know that we were rooting for her to take out Micah, but,
Yeah, we are.
Please throw him down the stairs and then back up the stairs.
That jump scare is really, really effective. There aren't a ton of jump scares in this film. As the franchise goes on, they become more prevalent, and I think more kind of like skillfully prepped and executed. But, those two, watching her being dragged out of the bed. And the other thing that really struck me, and it was such a weird instinctual thing on Oren Peli's part, is her just standing there.
Yeah.
For hours.
Should not be as scary as it is.
I love those moments.
It's so scary.
Shuddering body. And I remember that's when my daughter got hooked, is to watching that somebody staring at somebody, because that's also like, my daughter had night terrors back in the day. My dad does too. And my wife would be watching a movie, and we'd turn and we'd look down this dark hallway where my daughter was, and she'd be just standing in the hallway, asleep, standing in the hallway looking at us. And we would and we would walk back in their room, or we'd open their door and they were just standing next to their bed because they were, sleepwalking. And she knew about that. And so I think she's like, oh my gosh, that's me. So it was some freaky stuff. And when I watched it again, that's the thing. The jump scares, whatever with me. Yeah. But that image.
I would love to know in this one and then subsequent ones, was there any moments that really stood out to you, like as the iconic moment in your brain that scratched an itch? For me, it's the chandelier moving.
Yeah.
I always just remember how terrified that made me at the beginning. It's just something so simple, just the movement of something that's should always be static. Does anybody else have like imagery that really sticks out?
A moment for me is the first time somebody talked about the lockdown camera. Like a good chunk of this movie is in the bedroom, right? And just that lockdown image, and I think that's the main poster image, right? We when you say Paranormal Activity, you always sort of picture that image, because so much of this movie is just while they're sleeping. And so the first, from my favorite moment in this movie, is the first time you see the shadow on the door as they're sleeping, because we are so vulnerable when we're asleep. And if you're alone in your house, you have to believe that you're alone in your house. How else can we sleep at night, right? And so the idea that there's somebody there, and it's probably a demon, right? And they're totally vulnerable because they're both asleep. and the stillness of that. And that's where, somebody was saying it's like it's a magic eye or, find the image game. Yeah. And those long lockdown scenes, that's where our eye is trying to, who's after them because they're asleep and vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. Am I missing something?
Yeah.
Amy?
Yeah, mine is when Katie stands by the bed. I think that's the scariest thing in the whole film. So I have done that. Like, I have woken up in the middle of the night, standing by my bed, staring at it, and I think of how terrifying that would be for my partner to wake up and see me there. Yeah. And it's just that sense of vulnerability and threat. Like, she's not doing anything, but it's that implicit threat in how she's just standing there. Like, we don't do that. And so, yeah, I think that for me, just like,
I love the baby powder footprints.
Yes.
And I love that you don't really catch it at first, but then he enhances the video, he lightens it up, and then you can clearly see these footprints. That part always gets me. Like, it's the same thought I have in, like, how did they get Kermit the Frog to ride a bicycle? Like, how did they do that? Don't ever tell me how they did that. They got a human.
Yeah.
They're like, hey,
and it was
in
the
for a
same.
day. We'll give you a sandwich. You just put some footprints on the floor. I'm like, yes, that happened. Like, that it fucks me up every time.
Yeah.
And it's such a simplistic thing. And I love how annoyed Katie is with it. She's like, great, now we have a bunch of anybody's honest to God reaction though to it is just like, I gotta clean this shit up, and you can't put water with it because it comes paste, and it's like you can just tell how frustrated she is. But when you see that moment, you're like,
undisputable proof. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
There were two that I wanted to mention. One is, and I'll do this quickly, that one was the poster, because I don't know if that image is actually in the movie with the shadow on the door. And
right. They're not awake when we see the shadow on the door.
Yeah. And I really love that they incorporated those two, because it made me look at them and look at what they're pointing at, and then see that shadow and saying, is that what they're, oh my gosh, there's nothing there. And the other one is the attic, that classic attic shot that's in every found footage movie now. But also the idea of putting that photo way, way down there, and also makes me think, how did you get that not fall through the ceiling? But I really love that whole stressful going up in the attic. It made me, and I remember watching the film in the theater, like, don't go up there. What are you, nuts? Do not go in there and go get anything. And now, found footage film after found footage film has the attic or the basement. Yeah.
When the Ouija board is introduced, she has insisted, do not do that. And he does it. And in the same way that it creates our alliance with her, it also really invests us in the audience of saying, oh God, don't do that. Don't do that. That's clearly not the right thing to do. And so I think we love it when a character does something stupid in a horror movie, because we can be like, A, we're smarter than that person, but B, we can be like, don't do it, and knowing something bad's going to come of it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really like is the kind of the super titles of introducing each night. Like, it's the passage of time. It also intimates there is an outside party that has put this together for you.
Yeah.
And sure. In some ways we're like going, well, thank you for cutting out the endless, shots of Mika eating cereal or whatever. It's like somebody took the time to curate this down to, and it's such a nice running time of, like, just a little over 80 minutes, I think. Like, it is a good story, well told. And I think that's one of the things I like about it, is just kind of watching the clock tick down, because there can't be that many nights.
Well, and it's happening right around this time in 2006. I'm like, oh, look, it's tonight. We're watching it, Oh my God. Yeah.
I wonder if anybody has ever broken up watching the film to watch it just
coincide with the night.
Individual.
That's interesting.
That would be a fun watch party.
It feels like there's also us looking for clues in all those numbers too, like what dates and the times, trying to
like Donnie Darko or something.
Like Donnie Darko, like, are the times the same time? Is this happening? Like, we're investigating. I mean, we're drawn in, as we've all said, we've been inserted. And so we're drawn in as investigators into this too. We're also like, well, maybe I can figure this out before anything happens. I can save you all. and figure this out, what time this is happening, all those things.
And something that just struck me, and then I'll bounce to you, Frank, is that also like we have the idea of somebody curating, we have somebody fast forwarding the film for us. So we don't have to watch, hours and hours of Katie standing there. It's like somebody steps in and goes, watch this. Yeah. This is what's weird, is that she does this for hours.
That's exactly what I was going to talk about, the fast forwarding, who's fast forwarding. And it's part of what's so creepy about it, right? So her standing there for hours and that we've all talked about is cool, but it also, there's then another character to the movie. Whoever is manipulating my reality of watching this. So somebody went, whoop, fast forward. Yep. And it's like, was that the demon?
Yeah, and whose side are they on?
Right,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
This film was picked up by DreamWorks, and Jason Blum was one of our folks, one of our key players. And this is the movie that built Blumhouse. And the success of this film is what gave us Blumhouse today, the most successful independent film of all time in terms of cost to profit.
I'm a company member at a theater company in Chicago called a Red Orchid Theater Company. And one of our ensemble members, Levi Holloway, just in Leeds, Amy, where, and I think in London soon, on the West End, is the Paranormal Activity stage show. And he wrote that, and it was just in Leeds. It was a big old hit. Oh. I know. And so you can look it up. But he said it went great. And so hopefully on the West End soon. So that's that 15-year journey to the stage with all these pyrotechnics, I think it was the same people did the magic for the Harry Potter stage show, all of this stuff, it's going to be there. So that simplistic, you are there feeling will be really true in that woman in black maybe sense. That it's going to be that with all of these special effects and things like that, stage special effects, like practical special effects.
Because I have to jump in and say, we also did a Saw panel, last installment of Saw, because that was one that if it's October, it must be Saw. And we got from 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then 2010 was the last one of those. And 2010, we got Paranormal Activity 2. And then pretty much for the next few years, if it was October, it was a new Paranormal Activity movie.
Yeah.
And there's a Saw musical that played here in Chicago. And so I think that's funny that, these two massive franchises have both yielded stage productions that apparently are quite enjoable.
I wonder how much more it costs to do the stage production than $15,000 to shoot it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about, we won't go as in depth into the sequels, but I like the Saw franchise. I am so impressed that they have been able to kind of continue this story and keep pushing it forward. It doesn't feel like there should be that much you could get out. You shouldn't be able to wring 6, 7 movies out of this premise. Mm-hmm. And yet they do.
I think that like every other movie, and people have said this before, so it's not an original idea, but every other movie is good. The second one it's fine. It does a good job of like retrofitting this whole like backstory into it with the sisters, and you're getting more information about what happened in the past, and each film does a pretty good job of adding more of that back lore to it. But I really think like every other movie is actually like pretty good. Second one, not so great. Third one, where it's like them when they were little kids and it's shot on VHS, is brilliant. And then fourth one, it's fine. It's whatever. And then the marked ones, I think, is actually my favorite the first one, of course, is great. But immediately after that, I really love the marked ones because it blew it open, right? We really widened up this universe. And then what is it? Ghost Dimension or something?
I always want to say Ghost Protocol, but that's a whole different the Ghost Dimension, yeah.
Which I actually didn't rewatch. I rewatched all the way up to the marked ones, and then I was like, I can't. I tried, but I do like that they have done a really good job of moving it forward while filling in the backstory.
Very similar to Saw in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Since you just recently watched, which is the one that has the fan, the rotating fan?
That's
That's the
3.
third one.
3. So
yeah, where he mounts it on
I do love that part of that one, because it's such a long build up to that, and then it's like just standing there, right? I can't exactly remember. I just remember being scary. That's it.
Oh, so the babysitter is there, right? And she's sitting at the kitchen table, and it pans away, and it's just her at the table doing homework. And it goes, and then it comes back, and there's a figure in a sheet, and the sheet just drops, right?
Yes.
And it's like, oh, that's so cool. Like,
Yeah.
it's so freaky. And then it goes back, and then she finds the sheet and picks it up and is like, what the hell is this sheet doing there? It's like, that's brilliant. But just the like cheapness of that, right? We're gonna just put a fan, or we're gonna put a mount a camera on an oscillating fan. That's so clever.
Yeah.
That's
The justification of how something's captured, or like where the camera's gonna go, they have to you sort of verbalize like, oh, we'll put it up here to capture whatever. I always love that, the justification in found footage. In the subsequent Blair Witch movies, I'm like, oh, now they have, like cameras mounted to their headgear or whatever. I love the justification for why something's being captured in this angle at this point in time, and that is no exception.
I want to talk about that oscillating fan too, because I remember seeing part 3 in a theater, and what people were freaking out, and we're not seeing anything. It's just we are so out of control. We do not have any control. It sits on this fan. It's going to capture exactly what it's going to capture, and then it's going to come back. And every time it does, like, what are we going to see now? That movement where our frame of reference, our vision, is trapped to this movement was so. No one had ever seen that. That moment in 3 when they decided to put the camera on the oscillating fan was just absolutely brilliant.
It's such a good expansion too of the whole going in the attic trick, right?
Yeah.
Because it's that same kind of thing. You don't know what you're going to see over there. Okay, well now you do, but it's different.
In terms of the overall story, that we learn more about Katie's backstory and what happened to them as kids with each of the sequels. And how part 2 ties in with the photograph. So there's the burned photograph in the attic in part 1. They don't really explain. It doesn't mean anything. In fact, you could completely forget about it, but it becomes hugely important in part 2 because part 2 is mostly a prequel where we're following Katie's sister, and there's a demon. And so Katie's sister's husband is trying to get rid of that demon and decides to move the entity to the sister. And so then the very end of part 2 is the sequel where we find out what happens to Katie after the events of part 1. I think that's structurally brilliant and very similar to what Saw was doing with folding in on itself. Like, you like this story? Well, we're going to keep going back to the same story and seeing it from different perspectives.
Yeah.
Amy, what were some of your thoughts about the franchise?
Yeah, so I think I tapped out on 3. 3 was like the last one that I saw, but I went to see it at the cinema and again really enjoyed it. Was 3 the one with all the pots and pans, like with the big pan rack in the kitchen?
Well, that's 2. That's
I
2.
think that's 2. When the cabinets go, psh, yeah.
Yes. So I was like, okay. And I was like, so yeah, that's one of the things that always sticks in my mind is that shot, and just because I guess it's like. I always compare something like Jojo Rabbit with the shoes. Like, when something is purposefully focusing on a particular item, you know it's going to end up being really important to the story. And then it's just that tension of waiting to see what happens. But yeah, like I thought 2 and 3 were really good. I think I just lost off after that with like, oh God, it's going to keep going. Where is it going to go? And you don't know what the quality is going to be like.
3 was probably the last one I saw in the theater, because I was like, I'm good. And I felt that way about the Saw movies. The only thing that kept me going back to the Saw movies is that the procedural part of it, where it felt very episodic and like there's a mystery to be solved. And maybe this one will be the last one. They'll resolve it. With Paranormal Activity, it felt like they really did have to just be inventive and go, how can we push this out further and further? We talked about the oscillating fan. I think it's such a great device, because what we'll also see is we'll see something pan, and then we'll get a little glimpse of something, and then we pan away from it. And it's kind of like when we're following a character in a slasher movie or something like that, where we see them and we see something down the hall, but the character doesn't see it. And then we follow the character and we're like, oh no, like the character has no idea what's back there.
Yep.
And in this way, we were kind of like, okay, well, we have to wait and see what happens when it pans back. And it's such Ariel Schulman and Henry Joost are the directors of parts 3 and 4. And I like the fact that there has been a successful handoff, I think, time and time again. Christopher Landon is kind of our common thread as far as screenwriters go. And he took the reins for the first time with the franchise with The Marked Ones. That is his directorial debut within the Paranormal Activity franchise. But he's the guy behind Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day to You, which I love those films.
Me too, yeah.
And I just now realized that Christopher Landon is Michael Landon's son. So he grew up in the business, and it's nice to have seen him prove himself in a different way, because I think he started off as an actor and then moved into writing and directing. But I like the fact that he's kind of been instrumental in moving this franchise forward.
And The Marked Ones, that's part 5. And that's the one that ends with the in the kitchen at the end of part 1. And so if anybody hasn't caught up with the series, that probably should have been the last one. It would have been a really satisfying bookend for the whole series, because in part 1, at the end of the movie, we have the lockdown camera in the bedroom. Katie is dragged. Or no, she walks downstairs, and we hear her yell for her boyfriend, right? She yells his name, Mika. And so he gets up out of bed, he goes running down, and then we hear a commotion. We just hear a commotion, and then his body comes flying at the frame, and that's our jump scare. In the Marked Ones, we're following this, I forget the main character's name in Marked One, Hector. And so he's having paranormal activity going on, and he's trying to figure it out. And there's a cameo from the survivor from part 2, right? The stepdaughter, Allie. So there's a scene with her where she sort of explains everything that's going on. Well, you're part of the Paranormal Activity franchise now, and then at the end of the movie, he goes through some portal in time and space, and he ends up in the house from the first movie, and he's like, "Where am I? I don't understand this." And here comes Katie down the stairs, and she's possessed, and she's sort of like sleepwalking. She doesn't notice him, and he's standing right there in the kitchen, and he's like, "I don't know how I got in this house." And then she sort of comes to. And she's aware, and she sees a stranger in the house. She thinks it's an intruder, so she yells, "Mika, Mika!" She yells his name, and that's the audience is, oh my gosh, we're seeing the end of the first movie from another perspective. Mika comes running down the stairs. That's the only time they've brought that actor back in the whole franchise, I believe, right?
He's in 2 or 3.
Is he? Okay. He came back for the last time in this one to get stabbed to death in the kitchen. So Katie just grabs a knife and starts stabbing her boyfriend. So I thought that was very satisfying to all that many years later to actually find out what happened there at the end of the first movie.
Well, and if we talk about Ghost Dimension really quickly, I mean, it does feel like they ran out of gas, because the Marked Ones is so satisfying, and it is such a nice, diversion, literally. I mean, we actually get some diversification in terms of the cast. It's not just a bunch of white people every single time. And I really like kind of going into that different universe. But yes, it's a nice, solid conclusion. Ghost Dimension feels very much like we got to try to explain and expand, and it just goes, and we're going to see the Paranormal Activity. We're going to have this digital gugok, pillar of black gunk floating in the air. And it does just feel like it's a lot bigger. It is the biggest budget for a Paranormal Activity film, which is still only $10 million, which like that's the big budget of the Paranormal Activity world. But yeah, that one feels just a bit busy and not as satisfying. It feels like a special effects film as opposed to what we're talking about, which is a lot of suspense and really well executed jump scares and heighten and deliver.
Well, it certainly doesn't give us very much to do as an audience, you know.
Correct. Yeah, we don't have to do anything.
As investigators, we don't. And I think that's one of the things I really love about, you know, I loved about those like ghost hunter shows, or I love about those YouTube compilations of ghost videos, all that kind of stuff. I watch them every week still. And I really love still being that investigator, like me getting to decide whether something's real or not because something looks janky or something looks kind of, or a doorknob rattles. I'm like, oh, was that a ghost? Like that kind of stuff, the simplicity of that. I feel like sometimes studios think that we expect something more than we do. And I mean, the proof is certainly in Host, the movie that came out during COVID, is that we don't necessarily expect these giant things, that we kind of love the simple and the magic tricks, the close-up magic and those things that people are just doing because they're creative. And the creativity of it is more interesting to me than a lot of 20 people in a movie like this, or a movie like that franchise, or any sort of situation with ghost stories or demon stories that overcomplicates. I want like the people. I want the people to shine. I want magic tricks.
Just a real quick thing. I will say, to compliment Ghost Protocol, I'm going to continue to call it Ghost Protocol. To continue to call it compliment Ghost Dimension. The one scene that stands out to me is, you're watching those videos that they found of the girl sort of talking to this guy. And you realize that she's seeing into the future and into them in this moment right now. And I always just remember one of the guys sneezing and she goes, "Bless you."
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, of all, yes, this is more special effects and whatnot, but that is the scene that really got me. It really sort of kind of thematically came back to how simple-ish that can be. You're just witnessing something supernatural, paranormal happening in this time whatever warp thing, and I thought that was a really nice moment in that.
True, you can only capture the time shifts if you have a camera too.
Yeah.
Capture people moving through time. If you wouldn't notice that unless you are filming them. And I really like that too. Those clues.
I want to do a shout out to Toby. Toby is the demon that carries through in the series. Is Toby mentioned by name in the first movie, or it's the second one that we first learn about Toby? So Toby is the name of the demon that's latched onto this family, and then in Ghost Dimension or Ghost Protocol, which I love that title too. The idea is Toby wants and this is so Hollywood, right? This is where the series has jumped the shark and become like every other scary movie. Toby wants a human body now, or wants to be made flesh. And so they sort of borrow the same trick from the previous movie, the marked ones, where at the end of the movie we go through time and space, right? And so at the end of Ghost Dimension, we are there with young Katie and Christy as they do whatever ritual they need to do to give Toby a body. And so then we just see Toby's lizard-like feet at the end of the movie. It's gone way too far. They've run out of ideas, clearly. But now Toby is amongst us.
Well, and the fact that it's on June 6th, the 666, I'm just like, wow, okay. So let's bring things back around and just final thoughts on the franchise and, kind of what Paranormal Activity wrought.
I think it's a series that's probably better than a lot of people give it credit for. The original, it's so, maybe innovative isn't quite the right word, but I think that's as close as I can get, is that it was bringing it back to just some reality. We're getting something that's pretty realistic in terms of a horror film, and it could happen to you or next door to you. But I do appreciate that the whole series, tried to build a pretty good lore. Yeah, I mean, if you get too far into it, maybe it's a little really. But I really like it overall, and I like rewatching it more than I like rewatching Saw, which just feels so grotty at a certain point. You're just like, it's so gross, But I love it, and I hope maybe by this, more people will either go back and reevaluate it or reappreciate it. or maybe even see it for the first time, despite all the spoilers that we've had in here. Watch it anyways, because it's different than somebody telling you what's going on versus seeing it for yourself.
Brett?
I want to start a new Saw-like franchise called Grotti. That's what I want to do. That sounds fantastic. Not a parody, like the real deal. No, I'm fully and have been certainly since Blair Witch, and this was just the other punch that I'm really still obsessed with found footage films. Like I said, I wrote one. I even pitched a found footage series. I'm like, I felt like when I pitched it to a bunch of studios that they were like, found footage, what? Because my whole pitch deck and my document was all about how great found footage films are and how much money they make and all these things, and on YouTube, as I mentioned, all this stuff. Less about the series, more like, come on, get on board with found footage. And they were like, man, I really think the legacy of it is, it's big money. It's big money, and it's also lots and lots of fans, all these sort of outshoots of ideas and things like that. One of my favorite things at the end of each video, or almost all videos on my favorite of them all, which is Nuke's Top 5, which is like the top 10, actually, ghost videos of the past week or two. He always says, is it real or is it just an elaborate hoax? You decide. And I'm always like, that's the key. And when he says elaborate hoax, you're like, no, that was nothing. That was not elaborate by any means at all. But also it's the same for Paranormal Activity. Those dinosaur footprints are not elaborate at all, but they are effective. Mm-hmm. The Ouija board catching on fire is not elaborate, but it's effective. And I think that engagement emotionally with the cool and janky special effects are just it's endearing, and it also makes us feel like it's possible. Like, it made me really feel like I could do that. I could do that, and it would be really fun to do that. And I think that that is the thing. Like all good cheap horror films, it makes us feel that way and makes us feel like we could make more and more and more and more and more.
Mm-hmm. And somebody does.
And
Amy.
I wanted to finish off just by saying, how great I think these films are, and how much they really, for me, instilled that love of found footage that it very much continues to be one of my absolute favorite bits of genre. Particularly ones that aren't full of jump scares. Like, I love a film that's just tension, and I think there's nothing quite as tension building as having so much space to play with and not very much going on. It really kind of sets you on edge. So yeah, they're better than they have any right to be, particularly for the budget, and I think really, really fun. And I also wanted to kind of finish off with doing a little, if you love Paranormal Activity, if anyone hasn't seen Ghostwatch who's watching this, I would thoroughly recommend that.
It's harder to get here, Amy, than it is over there.
So good.
Ghostwatch is on Shudder right now.
Oh,
and you all should be watching Ghostwatch, because yes, that is the great granddaddy of Paranormal Activity.
Nice. Okay.
So good.
Chelsea.
Yeah, I have such a sentimentality with found footage and Paranormal Activity in general. I mentioned my grandmother. She got me into horror, so any sort of love within the horror genre that I have, I just sort of equate it to her, and I'm like, oh, I think she would absolutely love this. And it's the same sentimentality that I have with Blair Witch, that I have with VHS.
Yeah.
The first one is great, the subsequent ones are terrible, but I just love that franchise so much. There could be so many more Paranormal Activities, and no matter my opinions of each one, I'm going to watch it and I'll love it all the same.
Thank you. Frank.
I wanted to start with a shameless plug for my own found footage movie that I made called From Jennifer, which is available on Tubi and Amazon and elsewhere. And because like Brett, I do love the genre. And as a filmmaker, I found it a unique challenge to set up camera in a certain way and make that justified. Like, why are we watching this scene, right? Like, and trying to be clever about that and do my own version of that. Paranormal Activity does its version of that very well, I think. And I had the pleasure of seeing a screening just last week. So it was on the exact date of the 15th anniversary. They showed this movie in theaters. And so I went to my local AMC, and it was a sold out screening, which I was pleasantly surprised. And most of the people at that screening were younger than me and had never seen it. So it was a lot of 20-somethings who had heard of this movie but hadn't seen it. And they put down their phones, and it was very cool for me, being one of the few people there who knew what was coming, right? But those quiet scenes, everybody was very quiet. And then at the very end of the movie, when the guy comes flinging towards the screen, bloody murder was, I mean, everybody just screamed and popcorn went flying. And I got a real kick out of that. As someone who loves going to the movies, don't believe what the studios are saying and the streamers want you to believe, that nobody goes to movies. You have to sit at home and watch every movie by yourself. Go to the movies, see movies with other people. It's a blast. And this kind of movie especially.
Thank you, Frank. I couldn't agree more. I'd also just like to say, I think found footage kind of got a bad rap as that people think it's easy to make. People think found footage is easy to make. And if you watch this franchise in particular, you see how skillfully everything is set up and executed. It doesn't happen by accident. The trick is making it look like it's happening by accident. And that's kind of what you're referring to, Brett, the idea of the magic trick.
Yeah.
Like it makes it look like it just happened. You just happen to be catching it with the lens. And thank you all so much. What a great conversation. Hope you all have a fantastic October ahead. And looking forward to having you on again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.